All right. Hi, everyone. We're so excited to kick off today's Impact Evaluation webinar. We're joined by Helen Goldberg, a member of the Resolution Advisory Board and a longtime Resolution volunteer. Helen is currently the director at Coleman Family Ventures. Today, she'll be going over impact evaluation and what information funders are looking for. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Helen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. This is very fun. I've gotten to do this conversation now for a few years. So a few things that I'd love to share at the start. As Somali shared, my name's Helen. I'm based in New York. I have been working with and for philanthropic funders for most of the last 15 years. First as part of a consulting firm with a corporate funder, and now in a family office, family philanthropy. I will start by saying I am not a technical expert in evaluation and monitoring, but I do have a lot of experience from a funder perspective, thinking about how we make sense of the data monitoring and evaluation that potential investees and grantees share with us, and how the questions that we often have about it. So that's the conversation that I'm kind of prepared to share with you and lead with you is how might a funder think about the data that you have, and then how might you bring that perspective to the table? Maybe just as others are kind of settling in and kind of coming into the chat, if you want to put in the chat your name, your venture, and where you are in the world. It's nice. I think it's nice to have a little bit of context for who's sort of on the line. So name, venture, and where you are in the world. And then with that, we can get started with what I'm going to change the name from impact evaluation to impact evaluation in the context of current and potential funders, because I think that's what we'll really talk about. And Somali, should we go ahead and sort of launch right in? Okay. So go to the next slide, please. So as you're coming in addition to putting in, thank you, Sina and Wahid, as in addition to putting in your name, your venture, and where you are, what do you think of when I say impact evaluation? A word, a thought? Just a heads up, we can see your Slack, so it's not just, as you change the screen, we can see your different things, your different windows. Michelle, I think that's you. What do you think of when I say impact evaluation?
Can I say?
Sure.
So I think the impact evaluation means that what you do, what it has impact for its society, the planet, and overall the community. And everything that we do in our work, definitely it has an impact. If it's a commercial company, definitely it has an impact in terms of the revenue or business impact. If we are doing anything related to social ventures, it has an impact for society. It has an impact for to the rest of the world, and how we evaluate that is actually impact evaluation.
Yeah, Wahid, I think I see that you and it looks like Sina are kind of on the same page, that results seems to be, the thing that comes to mind. Results could be on your financial bottom line. Results could be on the impact on the community. I also see in here causal effect. I see evidence. I see storytelling. These are great. Before and after, quantification of the pros and cons of all we do. Any other thoughts? Impact evaluation?
Can I go?
Sure.
Yeah. For me, I believe impact evaluation looks beyond what I call it output, and because okay, for me, I believe output is probably okay. I can say it's short term. Then we look beyond short term to long term. which I call it outcome. So there's output and outcome. So I feel like the impact looked at the long-term okay, let me call it result of the project. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you've already sort of skipped ahead 4 slides in the presentation, Ambrose. So thank you for previewing for us for some of the things we're gonna do. I mean, I think one thing that I'll share is having now led this conversation for Resolution Fellows for the past few years. It's so interesting to hear your all responses, which are, I think, trending more in the direction of what I'm hearing the field say. I think once upon a time, the field was very focused on solely quantifying things that you were doing. And thankfully, you all are leading the charge, and the field, I think, is following and saying impact evaluation is so much more than that. It is data, it is tracking, it's what you're doing, but then it's the result of that. And it's then how are you also communicating and making sense of that? So the storytelling piece. Anyone else want to jump in either in the chat or on the phone on this question before we kind of move on to how I think of it? I see Sina, I see a hand raised.
Sorry, hi. So I think, of course, it goes in line with what everybody has been saying, but I think when I think about like impact evaluation, of course, in relation to the projects that we do, I think in simple terms, it's like a report card for like a project or a program. It's supposed to check to see if like the project made a difference and how much of a difference it's made, right? So basically answering the questions like, did the project work and how much did it really help or support the community that you're working in? So of course, within that framework, we're more interested in knowing like trying to compare what happened with the project to what has been happening without it. So looking at the before and the after, essentially.
Yeah, or to your point, the counterfactual, what would happen if the project didn't exist?
Yeah.
Michelle, would you mind
Can I-
putting it? Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I think I forgot one thing. I think when I also see the word impact evaluation, I think on top of seeing the result or the data or whatever, I think, yeah, it's also help us to as internal, like it's for internal use and also external. I feel like for internal, like to see how far we have gone with
Mhm.
what work we have done, like to see whether we're on track. Then also for external, like to inform probably if you have partners, what really they have or what their money has so far done, the impact it has resulted. So it's basically also for internal and external users. Thank you.
Yeah, those are 2 really important points. The first, I think, on progress. Impact evaluation is not something that happens at the end in an ideal world alone. It's happening on an ongoing basis so that you are able to adjust and able to improve as you go along. I think that's really, really astute point. And then there are a lot of different audiences for impact evaluation. Your leadership team is going to be the first and primary, and then there are going to be a lot of others. Typically, there's going to be community members who are participating in or impacted by your program who should often be part of that conversation. There are going to be partners, there are going to be funders. That's going to look, the set of audiences is going to look a little bit different for each venture, depending on what your model is and how you run. But I think you're often right that there may be one sort of set of truths about your impact evaluation, and then how you share that out with different audiences is going to depend on those different audiences' kind of needs and questions. So let's, Michelle, if it's all right, go to the next slide. So this is the definition I use for impact evaluation, that in sum, it's a set of processes that help you understand what changes can be attributed to what you're doing, your specific project or program. I say a set of processes because it's no one thing, right? It is all the things that you're gathering, measuring, making sense of over the course of preparing for, implementing, and kind of finalizing a project and program. And then I think this point about change is really important. What is it that your program can realistically be said to be doing in the world? And then attribution. Oftentimes, you're going to observe changes in the environment. It's important to note those and make sense of those. And then as much as possible, extrapolate to what extent is your work contributing or fully responsible for those changes. And there are many different ways to think about that and many sort of degrees of certainty that we can get to. But there are trade-offs on the attribution question often. The further you try to go along the chain of proving attribution, the more expensive and time consuming your impact evaluation is going to be. So you're going to have to, as leaders of the organization, and that's going to be a theme through this conversation, you all are the leaders of the organization. So there's a lot of choices you all are going to have to make in everything you do, but that carries over into impact evaluation. You're going to have to make choices about where it makes sense to invest more, to go deeper into understanding what changes can be attributed to your work, and where it makes sense to notice the changes and help through storytelling make the case that you've contributed to those. Here are 4 of the main purposes I think of when I think about impact evaluation. The first is to determine the ROI, that's return on investment of an intervention. Noting the return on investment, it's both sides. You want to be thinking about what you're putting in and what the results are coming out, and whether it's kind of worth it, right? Like that's part of the question. What are you getting out of it for what you put in it, and is that worth it? That's kind of that question. The second, this is to Ambrose's point, to learn and adapt. Impact evaluation that is data collected for data's sake is a waste, frankly, right? There should always be a purpose for what you're collecting. Sometimes that purpose is going to be for the last thing there in the green square, reporting and sharing results. And you might be doing that in order to convince a funder to give you more, to comply with a requirement in a grant or a contract, to engage your community and help them feel more bought in and excited. But often a piece of that is going to be to inform your own practice and ideally help you improve on a constant basis. You'll note that if you're going to be learning and adapting, this isn't going to be scientifically clean in the way that a clinical drug trial might be, or a randomized control trial may be. To be frank, the world of social impact is largely moving away from randomized control trials as the end all and be all, because as I mentioned before, there's a huge trade-off in cost and time required to deliver those and the kind of impact they generate. If you're really focused on seeing something through in alignment with a model and keeping it clean without learning and adapting as you go, you miss opportunity to improve even further what you're doing live. And you miss opportunity to serve your community better, which is ultimately what you're intended to do. What you all are doing in your ventures isn't academic research in a lab. It's hopefully having an impact on the ground today. So we want to make sure that that's happening. And then the last square we haven't talked about here is informing future strategies and priorities. You should be changing what you can live where there are tweaks along the way that can strengthen things. And then sometimes you're going to reach some sort of conclusion via your data that will influence how you think about things in the future, but can't yet be implemented. You might find, for example, that specific subpopulations are more or less or differentially impacted by your program. Let's say your program is a tutoring program, and you find that youth ages 6 to 10 are showing leaps and bounds of improvement, but 11 to 14, not so much. That might tell you in the learn and adapt category that you need to put more effort right now, or more resources or more staff into that older age group. It might tell you that in the future, you all as an organization are actually better suited, your model is better suited to that younger age, and that's where you're going to prioritize your whole venture in the future, right? Like those are some of the strategic decisions that you all as leaders are going to be making based on data. Michelle, can we go to the next? I want to talk about this, and then maybe one more, and then I'll pause again, and if people have thoughts. So I mentioned before that I think of impact evaluation as a set of processes that start before you do your work, as you are doing your work, and that are sort of measured post. You, from this time you are starting to do your work, should be able to communicate about your impact model. that's the term that I'm using as to describe the sort of answers to the questions below. You should be able to clearly and succinctly communicate this to funders. They're going to expect it. It's an important demonstration of your own leadership, but it's also important in terms of your alignment with the rest of your team and with your community about what you're trying to do and to what extent. It's going to be impossible to set up impact evaluation, as in measuring change and attribution, without first knowing what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to measure against. So this is the kind of first step. That's not to say this isn't going to change. Answers to these questions may very well change over the course of your implementation. And that's great. It just needs to happen intentionally and be a decision. So to that extent, I'm actually going to read these out for you. I'm sorry if that's annoying. I know you can all read, but I think it's important enough to sort of double down on it. And I'd encourage you all, if you don't already feel like you and your team, you and your co-leaders have sat down and written and shared and agreed on answers to these, I think it's a really important exercise, and I encourage you to do it before you go pitching externally. So first, what need or opportunity does your organization address? What is the fundamental either problem or opportunity that you exist to address? 2, how does your venture address this need or opportunity uniquely, differently, better than anyone else? It could be that you are coming up with a model or a tool or a technology that's never been seen in the world before. It could be that it is a model that is completely proven in some other setting, but never applied in this geography or with this population. It could be that it's been applied before, but there are ways that your team is better suited to apply it. You're more expert. You have a deeper relationship with the community. You have better partners. You know, there are many different ways to think about this question, but this is your comparative advantage, right? What makes you all the ones to be addressing this need or opportunity? What's the impact you're trying to have? So I talked earlier about, like, let's say you're doing this tutoring program. Ultimately, what is your goal? Is your goal more literate adults? Is your goal kids who feel like they've got more support in their schoolwork and it's really more about empowerment? Is it about grades? Is it about, you know, what is it that you are doing? Is it about supporting the school district, right? What is the thing that you're trying to change? And being clear when you're answering the next question about your approach for achieving impact, about why that's the right pathway. So if my goal is about improving adult literacy, but my program is a tutoring program for children, I need to then make the case that my tutoring program for children is the best way in this community with this population, in this landscape, for addressing that desired impact of adult literacy. What are your current programs? So in our example before, we had 2 after-school tutoring programs. One was for younger children and one was for older youth. Yeah, and you were able to define those. Scope and scale of your work currently. So today, how many people are you reaching? How many people are you serving? How many units of whatever? Like, you all will know the units of whatever that you are measuring. Is it houses built, community served, families reached, youth tutored, right? Like, but you should be able to, at any given point, say, here's where we're at and here's where we're tracking towards. How do you define and measure impact? So this is the kind of core. And notice that it's the second to last question, right? Like, you need to be able to clearly answer the things ahead to be able to answer this in a way that makes cogent sense for your outside audience. Also note that I say here just top to one to 3 priority metrics. Most audiences are only going to be able to make sense of that much. And then in terms of the balance, oh, I hate when they it gives me the little thumbs up auto feature. In terms of the balance between the time and effort you invest in impact evaluation and how much it's going to serve you, if you're measuring 180 different factors, which I've seen a lot of nonprofits that really pride themselves on their impact evaluation do, you're not going to be able to, you're going to be spending a lot of resources on gathering that data. You're not going to be able to really make sense and apply it. It's too much for the kind of human brain to integrate. And then you're going to end up sort of losing the forest for the trees. I really encourage you to say, if we're saying that our desired impact is X, what are we actually measuring to say that we're contributing to that? So again, if my desired impact is really adult literacy, I really should be measuring 1 to 3 things about adult literacy. or progress towards adult literacy. I don't need to worry about kind of other features and factors. There may very well be other things that you measure that relate more to your organizational efficiency or fidelity of implementation of the model. That's not impact evaluation. That is called program or process evaluation, also important, but it doesn't tell you about ultimate impact or results. It tells you about progress along the way. So that may be the place where you measure things like, this site has a lower cost per head than that site. What is that telling us about the efficiency with which things are implemented? That as a leader of an organization, that's important to be tracking for your internal management, your controls, your allocation of resources, but it isn't ultimately impact. So think about that in kind of a different category: efficiency, fidelity of implementation, important, not impact evaluation. And then the last thing is, what's your impact to date, including your performance on your top 1 to 3 priority metrics. If you're too early to be measuring outcomes, what evidence do you have that demonstrates the effectiveness of your approach? You know, is it research that shows it's been done elsewhere effectively? Is it a pilot with a couple of participants that shows promise? But, you know, if you're going to tell me that your top priority metric that you're measuring is the change in literacy rates among youth who participate in your program, what has that change actually been so far? Make me believe you. So actually, I'm going to pause there. What do people think? Questions, reactions, disagreements?
I have not just a direct question, rather than like a thought, like the number 2, how does it address this need opportunity uniquely? When you are a new organization, and if you're not working with the technology, you're just a process-driven organization, and you are doing things better than others through the process. Often we found that when we speak with unknown entities regarding our impact, that how we are different and we impactful as an organization, we found difficulties to make the other parties understand that we're genuinely doing it. For us, it takes 2 years, almost, like Sherry, if I'm not wrong, it takes 2 years to get that confidence. Yet we're not there, like everyone get it, but a large group. But initially when we did, I mean, like, we have found it so difficult to convince people that the process it's better than others, and we are doing in reality. But we didn't have that much of bandwidth to show them what we do through our visibility. But that's one of the biggest challenge we had, and also I think still we have.
So I think what you're talking about is a storytelling challenge, right? If it's too early for you to have the data to prove that what you're doing is better than someone else, there still must be some reason that you believe it, right? There's some reason that you believe the process is better. And what you need to do is be able to articulate that in a way that others can understand. So in my tutoring example, let's say I'm in year 1 and I don't yet have enough data to prove it. I'm able to say, what we did was we built on 2 different models. One is a tutoring program that is from some other geography that has so much data behind it that shows the effectiveness. We took that and then we adapted it for the local community. And then the other model we brought in is a series of tutoring programs that already exist in the local schools that are really geared just towards the children in this area, but have shown, haven't shown progress or haven't shown results. So by bringing those 2 together, we're able to bring in research-based best practices from other places with, matching the specific needs of this community in a unique and different way than anyone's ever done before, right? You have to be able to tell a story of what makes you believe. If what makes you believe is you've got 10 years under your belt and you have data to prove it, fantastic. That's not going to be the case for most early stage ventures. Funders are going to understand that, but you still need to communicate what it is about what you're doing that makes you believe that it will be more impactful, different, better, et cetera. than anything that currently exists. I see a hand up, Eldad.
Okay, thank you. Mine is a question. I want to know on the part of the desired impact. Is it can our desired impact be informed by our goals and objectives? If yes, then where do we put because some goals benefit the company, while other goals benefit the community. So when I think of the impact, I think of the change we are doing to the people we're serving. Now, what about the changes we want to see in the company? Like we want to have maybe 10 other different, we want to be located in 10 other different locations, or we want to increase our income as the company to a certain amount, but this doesn't directly benefit the community. Yeah, so where do we leave the goals and objectives that benefit the company and the people working in the company, and the others which benefit the community when we're describing the desired impact? How do we make the difference there?
So I think you're talking about organizational or operational goals. One thing I'd say is, first, to your example of we want to be in 10 other communities, I would argue that if your program is impactful, then expanding it to 10 other communities is creating more impact because those other communities get access to it. So I think it's totally fine in the question about scope or scale of your work currently to say, today we're serving 5 communities, an average of 100 people per community, and we're targeting over the next 3 years to add 10 communities. I think that's a great story of intended growth to tell, and one that is often very compelling for funders. The other points, so for example, growth in income, growth in revenue, improved profitability, those are really important metrics for you to track. You may include that as one more question on this list. It wouldn't be impact evaluation. It is more about your organizational growth and health, or your operational efficiency. They're very important things for you as a leader to be measuring, for you to be tracking, for you to make progress towards, and frankly, for many investors to make sense of. But it's not actually of your impact. It is the sort of underlying foundation of your organizational health that enables you to then deliver the impact, if that makes sense. So you as a leader are going to be tracking a whole bunch of different things. Impact is going to be one important stream of that, and that's what we're talking about today. But you're also going to be tracking things like number of employees and their rate of retention and how happy they are, right? Like that also really matters, because without well-trained, happy, effective volunteers and employees, you can't deliver your program. But ultimately, that's not the impact. The impact is the result of having those well-trained, sufficient number of happy employees who deliver a program well. Does that make sense? It's almost more of an input.
Yeah, I get it. Thank you so much.
Michelle, let's go on to the next slide. And someone, I think it was Ambrose earlier, gave away the punchline on this one, but traditionally, nonprofits, social ventures, measured or tracked against a range of different categories. This is the language most commonly used, theory of change. And those categories were activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. I wouldn't fuss too much about the terminology. We'll go through each of them. But what is important is to know that you need to be tracking what you're doing, what the result of that is in the immediate term, what the broader result of that is, and then how that may be changing the world around your venture, right? You need to be able to sort of tell that whole arc of a story and how you're involved in it. It's not enough to just say, we ran 10 tutoring sessions. You need to be able to say, we ran 10 tutoring sessions that served 100 kids, that led to each of them improving their reading scores by an average of 10%. And then overall, across the community, now that we've been implementing this for 5 years, we're seeing more and more kids who enter high school at their grade level, right? Like you need to be able to share that kind of whole arc. So activities is what your program does to achieve its goal. It can be programs, it can be strategies. In my example, it is tutoring sessions. It could be tutoring sessions plus teacher training if I want to help, if I have two different strategies for improving literacy in the schools, if my two are, directly with students and then one with teachers. So that's my activities. Outputs are the specific measurable reach or products of those activities, and they're often measured in terms of number of participants or number of units. They are often a barometer of effort or a barometer of inputs. So, running 100 sessions or working with 100 children or with 20 teachers. It's an important indication of scale. You need to be tracking it. It is an ultimate impact, because working with 100 kids versus helping 100 kids improve their reading scores are two very different things, right? The helping 100 kids move their reading scores is where we get to outcomes. That's the result of the outputs. So my incredible tutoring program that is so effective has an output of 100 kids, and it has an outcome of an average of 10% improvement in reading scores. Impacts are that broader, larger scale change at a broader level, at a community level, at a regional level, at a city level, at a population level, something bigger that to which we've contributed. This is where attribution is going to be harder to prove, but it's going to be where you're going to start to make that case. So in my story, before my program existed, half of kids were reading at grade level in high school. And now that my program has been running for 5 years, that number has increased to 75% of kids are, there may have been other things that contributed to that too, but it's too coincidental. The timing is too coincidental to say I wasn't an important part of it, particularly because I know that the outcome of my program is a 10% improvement. So the ability to actually demonstrate and prove each of these steps is going to get less and less as you go along the chain. You should 100% be able to prove that you've done the activity you said, and your outputs should be pretty provable, and your outcomes you should feel a little pretty confident in. Impacts a little less so, but you should still be able to make the case, tell the story. Again, this is where the kind of logical connection between what you're doing has to make sense. If it doesn't, then you should think about your model and why you've set it up that way.
Can I ask a quick question here?
Of course.
I'm wondering for the outcomes, for example, like if the program has only been around for like a year or two, how do you, like, for example, like increase knowledge? Like, how do you measure that? And specifically given taking the context that our program, it's like virtual, mostly right now as well.
So we're gonna get to measurement on the next slide, but I will broadly say to the question of like when it's too early to have enough data to make the case, one, you need a plan of what you will be measuring. So you have to be able to say, I'm in year one of my tutoring program, we're going to be measuring pre and post based on the standardized reading test for all the kids who participate in my tutoring program. And so far we've run a pilot with 3 students, and each of them did better, or we're going to measure based on their parents' self-reported sense of the children's improvement in reading. Like, not everything needs to be a scientific test, but you need to have a plan of what you're going to do to measure and make the case of why that makes the most sense. It may be that it makes a case to make that makes the most sense because that's the only accessible data. And that's okay, but you have to sort of make that case. So maybe that makes sense, Michelle, that we go to the next slide and talk measurement. So measurement and data. You need to have a plan of how you're going to measure, and you need to think about what makes the most sense in your context, what data is accessible, how you're able to get that, how you're able to store it, how you're able to kind of story tell around it. Because there are a lot of different ways you can do this. You can compare to your baseline, right? So I can say in this community at the baseline, 50% of kids were reading at grade level when they entered high school. You can compare year over year. my year over year, the knowledge of this public health intervention has become more known when we did a random survey of 100 people on the street. So let's say my intervention is about teaching young children better hand washing in their primary schools. Year one, we asked 100 people on the street on a random day outside the market what they thought was good hand washing, and 23% of them had a good answer. We repeated that process a year later, and it was 30%. So those are some of the things that we can start to see kind of community change in knowledge. Another is comparing to a control group. So if you have any way of collecting data amongst a population that didn't benefit yet from your program, maybe it's another community, a different school, siblings, things like that, right? If I'm going to ask parents of kids in my tutoring program, what is your sense of how much your kid has improved? How does this compare to how any other children in the home have improved in their literacy who didn't participate in my program? That might give you a comparison or control group. Again, we're not at the sort of lab level, but it does give you a sense of what's the counterfactual. If not for my intervention, how might the community look different? You can see, I think, Sharon, Wahid, this is maybe speaking a little bit to your point. I think you start by measuring what you can, and you expand and you get more rigorous over time as you deepen your implementation and have a better handle on relationships with partners and on data. Critically, make sure you're using the data. Every piece of data that comes in should have some sort of use to you in how you run your program, how you change it for the future, how partners make sense of your program, how community members make sense of your program, how funders or investors make sense of your program. If there's a piece of data you're collecting and you haven't used it, you should probably stop investing in collecting it and collect something else. So interrogate for yourself, what is the data telling you about who benefits and how from the program? What does it tell you about how you can increase or decrease certain types of activities to increase benefit broadly or benefit for particular populations? Let's say you care more about girls' literacy because that has been a gap in what the community has focused on historically. But your tutoring program seems to not be focused particularly on girls. What should you be doing differently to really target that? And where is the program not fully delivering results? You need to pivot. And the last is find ways to include participants and community members in impact evaluation. So I would really encourage you all, where possible, to think about 3 to 4 groups, depending on what your model is, when you come up with your priority metrics. One is your leadership team, right? You all know the program the best. You all, came up with the model. What is it that you want to measure? 2 is any core partners. If you are delivering together with a core partner, if I'm delivering together with the school district, what are the things that they need to do? They need to know in terms of data in order to continue to be bought in. 3 is community members. What questions are they going to have in order to buy in, right? Like, I'm a parent. You want my kid to be in your tutoring program. What are my questions about your tutoring program that you need to be able to answer in order for me to be willing to send my kid there? And then the 4th is funders and investors. What questions are they going to have about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what are the results in order to come up with it? So that's the kind of last piece here is audiences. So the kind of next set of things I want to talk about more quickly, and then I'll sort of be quiet for a while and people can jump in with questions, is what are funders looking for? And I think the good news is this is a bit where I started, which is I think the funding field has moved in the right directions towards understanding that you all created your ventures and run your ventures in order to generate impact. And that's what you should be spending your time doing, rather than pretending that what you're doing is in a lab and trying to replicate sort of lab type results that take all of your time to focus on. We want you focused on having the impact and measuring it and making sense of it as in service of that. So if you could turn to the next slide, Michelle. So in the sort of old model, if you Google impact evaluation online and look up tools and resources, most of what you're going to see today is still going to be the old model, where they're going to tell you to get more data for data's sake. There's going to be a real focus on long-term expensive data collection to prove a program works. That's the sort of randomized control model from an attribution perspective. And then you're going to also see a historic approach in which funders are really dictating the metrics that you had to report on. That what you had to report on was the students' school readiness versus if you have some reason to believe and know that it's more important that to measure the parents' belief about the student's school readiness, right? Like those are two distinctions. And you as a leader we're now moving into a world in which funders more and more recognize that you as a leader need to be making these decisions. And in the current model, we're focused more on prioritized data that's more useful. Look, I in my seat as a funder am getting in reports and doing diligence on ventures all the time. When I am presented with 180 pieces of data, my first kind of approach is skepticism, because I don't believe that a majority of organizations are actually using that much money, or that much data. And I think that they're kind of collecting things for collection's sake in order to serve what they think is my interest. What I would rather have them do is tell me that they collected 3 things and tell me how they used those 3 things. And then I can trust and believe in their leadership and judgment. I'm not going to be there on the ground with them. I shouldn't be. That's not my job. My job is to make bets on organizations, models, impacts, leaders. And so what they need to be doing is convincing me I should make that bet. And I'm convinced I should make that bet when the leader has strong conviction backed up by data or some sort of reasoning. Instead of long-term expensive post data, we're in a world of ongoing data collection and analysis to inform ongoing improvements. When a grantee partner tells me they pivoted in their work because something changed, because there was a global pandemic, because there was a real estate boom in the region, because there was a climate effect, a huge storm, and that led them to change what they were doing, that builds, for me, a lot of trust in their leadership ability and the belief that they are listening to what the community actually needs and serving what a community actually needs versus serving their own model, which, like, let's be honest, focused on the model over the people is kind of a sense of ego. Like, that's not where we all want to be. And then we're also in a world now where you as a leader are going to be setting the desired outcomes, ideally with community member input and measuring against it versus the funder, which I think is all good news. Again, like, own your power as leaders. That's, I think, part of my message on this one. The next slide is just really a link to a couple of theory of change examples. These are a theory of change as a way to communicate the connection between your activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. Feel free to peruse these. I think it's on slide 7 or 8 and 9, and we attach a few examples. Feel free to peruse these on your own. And if you have questions about them or are interested in putting your own together, I'm happy to email with you or talk to you separately after this, but I don't think we need to talk about this a ton right now. Okay, question for you all. Put in the chat or say out loud, what do you wish funders, investors understood about your work and impact that they don't always get?
I can say.
Sure.
So a lot of things I actually want them to understand about us. First of all, many of them who do not have proper conversation with us, like when we reach out, they often misunderstood that as we run a global virtual program, what is the actual impact? And which is obvious, in many of the global South, the virtual education and any sort of activities are really not that much impactful because poor internet, and then people are not used to with such activities. And on top of this, during the pandemic, many of the schools or academics institutions adopted the virtual education, but that virtual education was very boring for the students. They do not enjoy it because it was a one-way lecture. They couldn't ask questions. There was not group activities. There was not interactions or any sort of engagement. So they resonate those experiences, whatever the stories they heard from others, with us, that it is like this. We cannot make them understand that it is 3.5 hours program and nobody left us through the process. They loved it, and they even go beyond their normal duties after they graduate from our program to support us. They bring our students. We do not spend any money on advertisement to address students that this sort of programs exist. You can apply to this. All of these students mostly coming through the alumni network that we have, and they work free for us. So I wish that our funders or the important stakeholders we want in our belt, they could understand that it is impactful and interactive. And that's something we look forward to do it. We see some progress. It's not like all the sad story we have. More we start communicating through our LinkedIn page that we've heavily focused. I think I often meet new people and they wondered that we are the one who behind doing this, because they felt it's done by large institutions, because the engagement in our LinkedIn page is amazing, and hope that this will continue.
I love that example because it shows a deep understanding of, one, what you're looking to do, two, how your community and participants are benefiting or reacting, and then three, how funders misunderstand that. And I think one thing that strikes me is that this is largely a storytelling challenge. I mean, I think about a pitch deck I recently received from a nonprofit that was 3 slides, and the third, one was, or maybe it was 4 slides. It was, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's the problem need. Here's how we're trying to do it. Here's why our way is better. So I think part of what you're saying is your way is better, right, than what they might assume virtual is. Here's our results so far. Here's our team. And then their last slide, which was kind of an appendix, was myths and facts. And so I could see you have a myth that virtual is boring and unengaged. And then the fact for you is word of mouth and participant referrals have led to 90% of your future enrollments. Myth is people aren't engaged in virtual. Fact is you have an engagement rate so far of, people sign, join every single class and click in or whatever. I think this is a manageable storytelling challenge because you fully understand what the gap is. And then Abraham, I love your point about impact can be measured quantitatively, or that not all impact can be measured quantitatively. I think it's a great point. I think this is another case where then you just need to tell the story of what can be measured and why that helps, and why that makes sense, right? This is where you as leaders are making a case. You're building someone's belief. I've got one more slide, so maybe I'll quickly do that and then I'll be quiet for all the rest of it. This slide is some incredibly broad generalizations, right? Like I'm really like painted a broad brush. So take the caveat that, but broadly speaking, I think of 4 different types of funder audiences. There are a million types, you can cut them in a million different ways, but there are 4 broad types that I think about, and they have some things in common within their type. The first is government funders. They're going to tend to be the most compliance oriented. Funding from them is going to look most like a contract in which they're going to be tracking things like outputs, alignment with what you said in your grant agreement, and specific deliverables. How many tutoring sessions, how many children, was it on the dates that you said, and did it cost within 10% of what you said your budget is going to be? Benefit of government funders is it is the most, often the largest source of funding and the most sustainable source of funding. But again, it's quite rigid, right? You're not going to have a lot of flexibility if you want to change things. And when you're reporting out to them, they want to know, did you do what you said you were going to do? That's what they most care about. Again, broad brush generalization, but that's it. Corporate funders are going to care generally, in my experience, on scale. So what's the big number? I serve 10,000 children. Now, if you ask me what's better, serving 10,000 children or 100 children, the answer is like what do you mean by serve, right? If you deeply transform the lives of 100 children, that's a different thing than having one training session of an hour long with 10,000 children. Corporate funders on average are going to care about the big number because that's how they make the case. And then when I say collateral here, they want glossy photos, they want pretty stories, they want quotes from community members about how you transform their lives, and thank you, corporation, for supporting this effort that enabled me to transform their life. Like that's, so if you're going after these funders, think about how you're going to be able to deliver on that. They'll often ask for it. The benefit of corporate funders is they can be relatively flexible. They can make decisions pretty quickly. And if their interests are aligned to yours, so for example, if they have a large customer or employee base in the place where you are working, they're going to have a lot of incentives to support you. Institutional funders, here I'm thinking about staffed foundations. These are foundations where the people making the decisions are professional staff. They're not family members. So Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, all the big foundations are institutional foundations. They're going to look most like what I described as that kind of old model. They're looking for the ways that your venture, by funding your venture, is contributing towards their longer term strategy. They probably, over the course of 10 years, need to deliver to their board something that says, I put out $10 million to 10 different organizations, and in sum, they led to an increase in literacy rate in this region by Y amount. So they want to know, how do you plug into something that they have to deliver on? They're also going to want to know about learning and best practice. They're going to want to know, what have you observed, learned, what is your data showing, in order to then inform their broader portfolio, the 10 other organizations that they're also funding. And the last is families and foundations. Here, again, broad strokes, broad brush, but personal relationships with you as the leader are going to be really important in a lot of these. These are going to be really relational kinds of things. So you need to have the data to back it up. You need to have the storytelling, but you also need to think about the connection between how the connection between you as a leader and the funder, but also how you help the funder feel the impact that you are having. That's what's going to hook them. Families tend to be the most flexible dollars, so that they're valuable. They may not be the highest amount like government funders, but they're the money that you can flex the most, which always has value. And that's all I got. Questions, reactions, thoughts? I can put my email also in the chat if people have future questions, reactions, and thoughts.
Michelle, can you go back to the previous slide so that I can see and maybe ask a question now?
I had a quick question actually, Helen, when you mentioned about serving 100 children in a meaningful way versus 10,000, how would, so let's say like if we were to measure like how one served like 100 people in a meaningful way, like what are some of the things that you could use to measure and make that case?
Yeah, so then you're going to want to describe your outcomes or your impact in with a real focus on the depth of transformation. So your whole story then needs to be about how you fundamentally change the course of individual, family, community, well-being, lives, income. You're going to focus on the durability of change, the depth, the durability of change, the kind of permanence. One thing that is really compelling to funders is when your model is meant to solve the problem in 5 years and then go away, right? Like most of the things that we're talking about here are intractable systems-based challenges that will, food banks are always going to need to exist, right? Like emergency response always going to need to exist. But if your model is something that after being implemented for 5 years, permanently improves incomes for this population in this region, and then you can move on to the next That's going to be expensive to do, but it's so sticky and long-term that like that's a story that's really compelling to tell. So you need to think about the way that you tell, again, the kind of durability and depth story. And this is where ROI comes in, right? Like ROI, you can think of in a the kind of shorthand sense is you want to have the highest R for the lowest I, right? But if your R is super, super, super high, that changes. That's why it's a fraction, right?
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Thank
Abraham?
you.
Yeah. Abraham?
Yep, great. Thank you so much. This is a really, really great session. I was just enjoying all of the new things I was learning. The big highlight for me is just the slide that you're currently on, the funders and what they might be looking for. And this kind of helps tailor pitches or even in filling applications for some of these grants. I think my question here is on impact evaluation, looking at the entire process that you have shared. Which is better, to do an internal impact evaluation of your project or to resort to external impact evaluation? Because there are instances where it's probably easier from outside to assess a project's life cycle from its inputs to outputs to outcome and then the impact levels, and then kind of try to assess the objectivity or the progress of data. It's different when you are also involved and how you end up measuring it. So which would you recommend as the best option for impact evaluation from an internal or external perspective?
It's a great question. And the answer is annoyingly, it depends. Like there is no, a hard and fast answer. One thing that I will say is even when you work with an external firm or academic institution as your external third-party advisor, you're still going to be involved as the leader of the organization. So you're still going to be doing things like sharing with them what you're trying to prove the impact is so that they can measure against that, right? They're still going to start with what it is you say that you're doing, what you say your activities are, what you say you're trying to measure, and then that's what they're going to be assessing. So no matter what, what your impact model is going to influence that. I think ultimately it's a basic kind of cost benefit trade-off decision. I've seen instances in which it is more efficient, cheaper, faster moving for internal staff members and volunteers to run it. And I've seen exactly the opposite. I've seen cases where it's cheaper, more efficient to have some sort of ongoing contract or grant funded relationship with an external party to do that so that it doesn't distract from staff time. Unfortunately, it just really varies. I would say no matter what, know that you're going to be involved. No matter what, only collect things or have a partner collect things that are going to serve you. And no matter what, even if it's an external partner, make sure you're getting information along the way that helps you inform what you're doing along the way instead of waiting till the end.
Great, thanks, Helen.
I know we're at the top of the hour. Any last thoughts or questions on your minds?
I just want to share thoughts. Like overall, I enjoyed this session. I think it is helpful. And personally, for my organization, I think it helps different things to see differently. Even like someone else from the outside who doesn't know anything, and identifying few things are very important and something we learn differently. Like I like the advice you give, meat and the facts, something we can definitely do that. And also this particular slide, I think, considering like approaching different sort of funders and differently, which is something we do, but not this systematically, I would say. Something would be helpful in the future. So thank you so much for doing this. I think we all are benefited from the Resolution Project fellows who were here participating. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Great.
I'm glad.
Just to add a little to Wahid's comments, I was asking myself, why would we be starting with impact evaluation as the first workshop? Shouldn't we be starting with those ones like product design or how to get your pitch right? But then it was one of the statements you made that impact evaluation is not necessarily the end of your project or whatever impact you're trying to get. It's that that junction you pause to reflect, hold yourself accountable for what you've already invested in, and look at how you can increase the impacts that you are aiming to achieve. So this was quite useful as well for my team, and looking forward to next sessions.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all. What a fun way for me to start my morning. Now I have to go actually do my job here at work. But wishing you all a good day. Good luck with MasterCard and with your ventures. You have my email address if you need it. And I'm sure if anyone wants it, that Michelle and Somali can share the deck and the links. Go be leaders.
I'll jump in really quickly. Thank you so much, Helen, for hosting today's session. And before we all log off, I would love to get a screenshot of everyone to share with the resolution team. If you don't want your picture taken, feel free to stay off camera and I can count us down to 3. So you're all ready once the picture is taken. All right. 3, 2, 1. That was great. Thank you so much. And we can end the session here. Have a great day. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.